Take charge of your leadership development. Join our How to Take the Lead Substack community for bonus materials, exclusive content, and discussions that will challenge and change the way you lead. Visit howtotakethelead.com to find out more.
Don't wear hot pants to a board meeting.
What?
You're listening to How to Take the Lead with Lee Griffith
And Carrie-Anne Wade.
Two corporate colleagues turned business besties who question everything we've ever learned about leadership.
What started with us putting the world to rights over a gin after work is now a weekly show challenging the myths and perceptions and exploring what leadership looks like in the modern day.
We'll also be sharing our experiences and stories along the way.
You can find our show notes at howtotakethelead.com.
Hit subscribe to receive new episodes every Thursday.
Plus, we'd love for you to rate or leave a review of the show.
And please share your thoughts and stories on the topics we cover using the hashtag HowToTakeTheLead. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of How to Take the Lead. There's a second episode.
No, already. Oh, God. This is the whole point of the podcast, though, to do more than one episode. So we're going to have to get used to this.
So today's episode, we are chatting about something that's actually quite close to both of our hearts. Sorry, that does sound really cheesy, doesn't it? And I've been watching too much American TV. But it's a topic that's come up in practically every series that we did when we were doing our IG Live shows. And it's the notion of being yourself at work. So not feeling like you have to change who you are to fit in. Anyone that's heard me talk about my journey before will have heard me say about my perceptions when I went into management, and that pressure to look a certain way to fit in. So, you know, for me, it started with the clothes, then it became my personality that I was trying to change. And then suddenly I didn't recognise who I was. My values, I don't know, we're in lost property somewhere, and it all just started to feel a bit dirty. And it was only really at the point that I was saturated and felt fed up that I thought, no, I just need to be myself. And when I started to be more of myself, you know, leaving my hair to be curly, ditching the power suit, wearing flat shoes, oh my goodness, if I felt like it. It was only then that I really started to gain confidence in my role, and I think people took me more seriously, but that may well have just been my projection because I felt more comfortable. I suppose that's a hard one to test in hindsight. So it's been something that I've really been interested in ever since, and I think now with my new hat on in the business, it's something that I work with leaders on around building their personal brands, and when that the look and the feel part of the brand discussion comes up, it's led to some really interesting discussions. You know, what the expectations are that are out there. Are they going to be taken seriously? You know, what's the business etiquette as if it's written down in some Bible somewhere? And it's men and women. It's not just, you know, I've had conversations with both. I've always been really forthright in my view that you're more likely to build connection when you're yourself, when you feel comfortable. People absolutely can see through fakes. So you have to bring your personality to work, you know, and that's what I've learned over time. But, you know, I know we've talked about this before, but I would love to know kind of where you're at now, I suppose, Carrie-Anne.
Absolutely, Lee. I think it's we talk about it a lot, don't we, about being authentic, and I think that's a word that some people love and some people like, what does that even mean? But I do think it's genuinely what we talk about around being yourself in the workplace, like being able to represent who you are in your role as a leader, because I don't believe that all of a sudden you're a different person because you've gone to work and it's 8 a.m. and you're a leader now. Like, you are one person. There's lots of facets to you, but you are who you are. And I think it's interesting what you said around it started with the clothes and the appearance stuff, and then it kind of it progressed from there in terms of your journey around feeling comfortable with yourself or not in that space. And I think absolutely agree with the bit about appearance. And there are these expectations that within the first, 7 seconds, people make a judgment about you. That's how long you've got to make a first impression. So a lot of that is bound to be based on appearance, isn't it? And what you look like. But I think that kind of, that comes with some downsides, doesn't it, about these expectations of how you have to look and how you have to dress in the workplace and to be a senior person or a leader in an organization. But then absolutely agree, it goes beyond that. And we're talking about ditching the power suit, and I always think about the big shoulder pads. But with the big shoulder pads, I think sometimes, particularly in my experience with women, comes the pointy elbows as well to go with the big shoulder pads, and that kind of whole vibe that there used to be around, maybe that more alpha female type leadership role model. And that's, I didn't see people who had personalities like mine or traits like mine in leadership roles for a very long time in my corporate career, actually, because I just saw women who came across more like men and acted more like men and spoke more like men, were actually quite, and I feel like saying I don't feel like I felt they were women who were assertive leaders. I felt like they were borderline aggressive. And I felt like that's how I'd have to be then if I wanted to be a leader. And it wasn't until I saw slightly different leadership styles in that space that I felt more comfortable, more confident to think, no, it's okay, I have to be myself. And absolutely your point about, people see through fakes, like you'd be like going and doing a job interview and acting like you're a totally different person. You're soon going to get found out if you get recruited on the basis of that interview, and then you go into the job and you're totally different. So I genuinely do think you have to be yourself, but I do think that's easier said than done in quite a few circumstances.
Yeah. So how do you judge what's appropriate? How do you know? There's probably some really obvious things. Don't wear hot pants to a board meeting.
What?
Note for the summer there.
Note to self: no sequined hot pants for the next board meeting.
If you've got a really kinky side, leave it in the bedroom. There are appropriateness, but I suppose it's that understanding what's that level of appropriateness. And if you work somewhere where the rules are really rigid and you feel you can't be yourself, how do you understand if the red lines that are there are real red lines, or actually it's an organisation and a culture that's got its head stuck up its backside, and actually it does need a shake up and a change? It's a hard one to judge.
It is hard, isn't it? And some of that is about how confident you feel about testing those waters, I guess, which again is another easier said than done. But if you work in an organisation where everybody turns up wearing grey suits and white shirts, regardless of whether what gender you are, like, what happens if you decide that you're going to wear a bright colour? What happens if you decide you're wearing a red trousers to work? And judging that reaction a bit. And I think sometimes we can be a bit nervous to challenge that status quo, so we don't do it and we start to conform because we're worried about a reaction without necessarily understanding what that reaction might be. And more often than not, sometimes there isn't one, or people go, oh wow, I really love what you're wearing today, it's really bright and colourful, or whatever. And so I sometimes think we go in with our own worries that we're going to create this big stir without actually necessarily like knowing that that's going to be the case. But then there's also a bit for me, like, if it then is questioned in the workplace, you need to feel confident that you can ask for clarity about what that issue is. And I think that's when you'll find that maybe it is a bit of a non-issue, because once people are questioned about, so what does it matter if I'm wearing bright colours today and not black, grey and navy, like I'm not quite clear, can you explain to me what the issue is? That you'll find people can't really explain it, other than that they just find it a little bit uncomfortable because it's different to what they're used to, and then it almost kind of takes the heat out of that issue, because it really isn't one when you come to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And it's weird because particularly, if you work in an organisation that perhaps doesn't have a uniform, or in a department within an organisation where you don't have to wear a uniform, there isn't necessarily policies, procedures that dictate, not like when you're at a school and they say, oh, you've got to wear. We had a riot at our school because someone, this is actually really true. So a kid shaved their head but left a little fringe. This is peak 90s, by the way. And they were hauled in front of the assembly to be made an example of, because they had the wrong haircut that breached school rules. And the whole school rioted and the head teacher got sacked, and it was all over the North Wales news at the Times. But it's like you don't necessarily get that in a workplace, do you?
No.
And I suppose, yes, you can see what other people are wearing or doing, but it can be hard to make that judgment. I know I used to be, just to get my hair cut made me self-conscious. Oh, they're going to comment on my hair today, and you've had a haircut. I didn't like the attention. So it can be really simple things versus, do I wear heels or flats?
It's really weird how simple, like this very simple things, like how many times have you been in a situation where you or someone else has maybe dressed slightly more smart for work than they normally would and get the comment, oh, have you been for an interview?
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
That's like standard like line, isn't it? Like just because that day you might have decided that you wanted to feel a bit smarter because you're doing a presentation or whatever. So I think there's something about, appropriateness for the scenario. And again, that's about expectations, isn't there? I guess if you went into an interview scenario, there would be an expectation that you've made maybe more of an effort than you would normally make to look smart, whether that's right or wrong. And again, probably not a hot pants scenario, depending what job it is that you're going for an interview for. But I feel like you can make an effort and still be you. And I have to be honest, I don't own a suit and I've never worn a suit to an interview. But I know there'll be lots of people that do because they think that's what's expected. But actually, if I put a suit on, I would feel really uncomfortable and so much less like myself that would almost become an issue for me that would probably affect my confidence in that interview, because I'd almost be more aware of what I was wearing because I put a suit on. Yeah.
Well, do you know the stress of just buying a suit? I mean, the meltdowns I've had in the next changing room back in the day, because it's just so unavailable. But you're right. I felt better when I became more senior and I went for interviews and I wore a dress with a nice little jacket or something over, not a suit jacket, just a nice jacket. I felt smart, but I felt I was representing myself.
Yeah. I also think, I'm just going to say this, I don't know what your views are, Lee, but I think the pandemic has changed things quite a lot as well, because people spent so much time out of the office environment, out of like physical environment. So we're all on screens with our elasticated waist. Maybe I wear leggings on the bottom. I don't want to over speculate, but we're going a bit more for comfort because many of us have been working from home more. But actually, when I've gone back into my office environment and I'm a leader in my organisation, I actually haven't thought twice about wearing trainers or flats to the office in a way that before I'd wear them to drive in and then put my heels on. And now I'm like, well, my clothes are still smart enough for the workplace. And what does it matter that I've got trainers on the bottom? But it's sort of weird that that's a conscious thing to be thinking about because it feels so different. But I also think it proves that like just because I've not got heels on doesn't mean I'm not going to be good at my job today.
Yeah. Although if you, this is me getting on my soapbox, but if you watch The Apprentice, like they're all still sucked into, they're perpetuating, aren't they?
Yeah, power suits, 6-inch high, sky high heels if you're a woman that you're running around in. Very rarely see the women on that wearing trousers even. It's always like dresses, guys in suits, ties. It's almost like, oh, it's gone casual today because it's taken his tie off. Like, that absolutely perpetuates the whole, power suit business leader image that I'm not keen on.
And they're all small business owners that are asking for money for investing in their small business. So actually their attire couldn't be any more inappropriate for what it is that they do. And it would be so refreshing to see these things represented or being more representative in the media and on TV and shows like that, because I do just think people get that. This was the same. Look, carry on with the issue. Blooming House of Commons. The fact that who was it? Jeremy Hunt or someone was on a Zoom call during pandemic and didn't have a tie on, for God's sake. And
oh no, what a drama!
And you had the old Reece Smog or whatever his name is, getting etiquette police saying, "Oh, he should be wearing a tie." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, we've got bigger things to worry about."
Maybe
in the world.
Needs to be wearing his pajamas more, considering how many times he has a little power nap.
But is that notion that you've got lead? If you look at Jacinda Ardern, yeah. Oh my God, we are really up on all her leaders. But if you look at her, you know, she wears a nice dress. You know, I think she gets that balance really well, and she's setting a good role model type vibe for people out there around what you can dress like as a leader. You don't have to be in a black or blue navy suit all the time.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I will step off my soapbox.
Yeah, do you want a hand getting down, or you're right?
Whether you're starting out your communications career or you're already stepping up into your seniority as a communications leader, the Cat's Pyjamas Ascend programme is on hand to guide and support you. It's a package of 6 one-to-one mentoring sessions where we'll be devoted to helping you achieve your goals and move on up with confidence. So if this sounds like it's something for you, please visit our website at www.cats-pyjamas.co.uk to find out more or book your free discovery call.
Hi there, if you're enjoying this episode of How to Take the Lead, please hit subscribe and go leave a review or a rating. We'd also love to hear your stories and thoughts on today's topic. Please DM us, our links are in the show notes, or tag us into your socials using the hashtag How to Take the Lead. I suppose the one thing that I'm really mindful of is that it's all right for us. We're sat here, we're two white middle-class women, and we're having this conversation through that lens. And we know, obviously, that there's discrimination that women face in the workplace. There was that, all that stuff that hit the news a couple of years ago about women being forced to wear short skirts and heels into an office environment, for example. So we know that kind of stuff happens. But there was a report out earlier this month called Broken Ladders. We'll leave the link to it in the show notes, which said that 61% of women of colour reported that they were having to change to fit in. And this compared to something like 44% of white women. You know, and women were saying that they had to change their language, what they spoke about, their hair, what they ate, sometimes their name, just to fit in. So, yeah, it's really easy for us to sit here and say, you know, lean into your personality, don't be scared and all of that stuff. But obviously there is a huge, huge problem out there that does stem from racial and sexual discrimination. And it got me thinking that obviously as leaders, there's a role that you have to not only think of yourself, but to think of the role that you have of making change happen in your organisations so that they don't feel discriminated against. So there's for me that thing around, you know, what are you as a leader doing to make sure that your organisation's being inclusive and that you're tackling discrimination, and that you're doing real actions and you're monitoring the right stuff and you're empowering people and all of that. And I'm sure we will get into that as a separate topic at some point because it's really important. I don't want to kind of wash over it. But I do think that the other element of it is that as a leader, if you start showing up as yourself, think of how empowering and the message that could set for your teams who perhaps feel that they can't fit in. So I think actually it isn't just about do I wear heels or not. It can send a really powerful message. Yeah. Sorry, that's a long one.
No, absolutely. I don't know, you're absolutely right. You need to consider what your role is as a leader, as a role model within your team, within your organisation and beyond. And I think it's so easy for leaders and for organisations to say, you know, we really value diversity. We value like your unique perspective and what you bring to the workplace. So, you know, we want you to bring the best version of you. But actually, how do you go on to kind of show that and for that not just to be words that you say? So there's something about, I think, you know, it's your role as a leader to be comfortable, you know, not conforming to all of those stereotypes, to be okay with you yourself demonstrating that you're your version of you and that you're not being a bit fake. So, you know, I think, but you also have to be able to have, I guess, some of those conversations and invite those conversations to happen as a leader. Like you need to understand where some of this is acting out in your organisation and ask people, you know, what it is that we could be doing to make people feel more comfortable in that space, because I don't think we can assume to know. And you talked about it just now, didn't you? We're looking at this through the lens of two white women, but so we can't assume to know what changes might need to happen to make other people who are different to us, you know, feel able to be their authentic selves in the workplace. So I think there is something about that kind of openness and transparency of conversation and the ability to do some active listening and take some action in that space, definitely. I mean, I also sometimes think that women are sometimes our worst enemies. We as women can be our worst enemies. And I've been in situations before, one example, I've been on a course where there were quite a lot of very young women who were starting out their leadership journeys, and they had someone there giving advice. And one of the questions from one of the delegates was, what advice could you give me about going for interviews for more senior roles in my profession? And the very first bit of advice that this woman gave, who was there as the keynote speaker, was, well, I would suggest that maybe you might straighten your hair before you have your interview.
Oh, she went right in on the personal comment.
Right in on appearance. Like, my chin hit the table, and I'm like, are you actually kidding me? And I was like, that's not constructive and helpful. B, what difference really should that be making to somebody's ability to be able to do the job? And actually what this person was looking for was some really practical, helpful advice about how to prep for interviews for more senior roles, not to be told that you don't fit because your hair's curly. Really?
And did anyone challenge that?
I tried to challenge it and got shut down quite quickly, and the conversation got moved on. And what was weird was that everybody afterwards then had the conversation about how inappropriate it was, but waited until that speaker kind of wasn't in the room to have that conversation. But again, I think there was something there about the dynamic of, it was a group of quite young individuals who are at early stages in their leadership journeys with somebody who was quite a lot older and more experienced. So maybe there was an acceptance that we don't challenge this view, and actually they know best. So that I feel like there's still so much work to do in this area, to be honest with you. Now we've started talking about it, like,
and it's an interesting, absolutely, that is not inappropriate. That's not appropriate guidance to be giving someone. But that doesn't. I'm always going to go back on myself a little bit, but that doesn't preclude that you shouldn't give advice to people if you think there are things to. I know that certainly in my career, I've had to speak to people just to suggest that they smarten up for interview or whatever, and it isn't because they weren't wearing a suit, but it was because they were wearing a little vest top and looked like they were going to sit out in their garden rather than, and you just knew that they weren't represented, people weren't going to look beyond their looks, and so you're like, put a cardigan on or do something that just elevates you a little bit but still feels comfortable for you.
Yeah, and I think it's back to that point we were talking about earlier about appropriateness for the scenario. So like judge the environment you're going to be in and think about what works, but how you can put your take on it and represent your personality. And I've had to have those same conversations before where I've worked with somebody who, would wear super high heels and fairly short skirts to work. And actually in our office environment, like, didn't really make a difference, but actually they were going to do a visit to a male forensic mental health ward, and it's like, you actually need to think about how you're going to represent yourself in that environment, not only for you but for the people that you're going to be around all day. And actually that probably isn't necessarily going to be the most appropriate attire to wear, and actually there might be a uniform policy that staff adhere to because it's in a clinical, very different environment. But I think you have to be able to have those conversations without feeling like it's something awkward.
Yeah. But coming from the right space, not just because you personally don't like something, or you think that, or you're, trying to perpetuate the issues that you see because you think that's the culture of the organisation or whatever. I do think that there is. I worked with a chief exec once, and we had the conversation about, does he wear a tie or not? And does he open, and that was, you think, what a trivial of all the stuff you could talk about. But that was a big thing for them because they were so used to feeling like, I'm a man who has to wear a suit and tie because that's what's expected of me in a corporate environment. And I was like, do you ever wear a suit and tie when you're at home or go out places? And he's like, no, I don't. I was like, well, just wear what you feel comfortable, roll your sleeves up and take your tie off. And actually the difference in his demeanour when he started doing that, he became more personable because he felt more comfortable in his skin.
Yeah. And it is funny, isn't it, how what you wear can be, it feels like it's very trivial, but can almost take up quite a lot of time and energy in terms of focus. And again, another example of a very senior director who had their first experience being on call in a health setting, and I was the comms person on call. There'd been a fire at a local hospital that needed to be evacuated. Actually, the senior director on call's role was actually to be being more strategic and thinking about what's going to be happening in the aftermath. There's somebody on site who's managing the immediate issue, but they phoned for 2 bits of advice. The first bit was, should they go to the hospital site? And my advice at the time was, not if you don't need to, because it's under control. And actually you need to be thinking about what happens tomorrow, in a week's time, 2 weeks time. So I don't know what value you're going to be adding by going. The second question, after having ignored the fact that I didn't think they should go, was, if I go, should I wear a suit? And that is honest to God 2:00 in the morning conversation with somebody. And it's like, well, again, I don't think you need to be going to site, but if you're going to choose to go, it doesn't really matter what you wear, and probably not, because they're evacuating patients from a hospital building. So do you need to be wearing a suit for that? And their view was, because it would show that I've got authority. But it's like, but have you? Because it's not your role to even. But anyway, sorry, I digress into a whole other conversation.
But it's true. But you look at again, we go back to the politicians. They do their big walkabouts and go and visit people in different places. Sometimes, yes, a suit probably does work, but when they're just doing the meet and greets, walking down the street type piece, they look really uncomfortable and out of place. I mean, that could just be because they're politicians and are really not connected to the world. but they do, and sometimes they just look really awkward, don't they? Yes. And so I do think that there is something about leaning into what you feel comfortable with, but assessing the environment and situation that you're in.
Definitely.
So our how-to moment. If you've listened to this episode, you're feeling inspired, but perhaps questioning what's next, I'm sure we've got some actionable tips you can take forward. I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleague.
Oh, blimey, the pressure. Well, my first tips, definitely work out what you feel confident in terms of, particularly talking about ditching the power suit, but it doesn't actually have to just be about your appearance. Work out what makes you feel most confident in the workplace and what helps you to feel like you're going to smash it at work. I think that's like my number one thing to go away and think about. And I also think, consider whether there's an opportunity to initiate some discussions, maybe in your own team or more broadly in your organisation, to ask people for their views about this kind of thing and actually what would help them to feel more comfortable showing up and being authentic in the workplace. If you've got an outdated uniform policy about what people have to wear, can you use that as the start of a talking point to really start having some conversations about this? Because it sounds trivial, but actually fundamentally what we're saying is sometimes this is the sort of stuff that can stop people feeling like they can show up and be their best in the workplace, and that's absolutely not what we're wanting to condone.
Yeah, and I think that has a ripple effect on the whole culture of an organisation. So yeah, it can feel really minor, but actually is probably one of your biggest signifiers of how staff are feeling in your workplace.
Absolutely.
I really like that. I think my only other addition would be to recognise the role you play as a role model. And so, yes, you may well feel really comfortable wearing a suit and tie, but just think about actually what that might be playing out for other people in your team and what you might be stopping them feeling like they can do because of the way that you are and you dress. So there is a bit of a reflection piece as well for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that role modelling piece is a really important part of being a leader, isn't it? And never more so in this situation. Thanks again for listening to today's episode.
Don't forget to hit subscribe so you're the first to receive new episodes when they drop every Thursday.
If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you would rate it or leave a review.
And let us know your thoughts and own experiences.
Get in touch with either of us on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram.
Or use the hashtag #HowToTakeTheLead.
Until next week, get out there and take the lead.